The median home in Aspen, Colorado now sells for over $13 million, and most of them sit empty. More than 60% of the single-family houses in Pitkin County are not primary residences. They belong to people who show up for 2 weeks in February, maybe a long weekend in July, and vanish. The locals have a name for what's left behind: dark windows. Entire streets of mansions worth $30, $40, $76 million. Lights off, driveways bare, month after month. A former mayor compared it to Detroit, not the poverty, but the emptiness. And the people who actually keep this town running, the ski instructors, the bartenders, the nurses, the plumbers, they can't afford to live here. Most of them commute from towns an hour away, sometimes more, crawling through traffic that the ski company itself now calls one of the greatest threats to the entire experience. But here's the part that will keep you watching. This is the third time outside money has tried to own Aspen. The first time, the money vanished overnight. The second time, the money created something genuinely beautiful, and then attracted forces that slowly consumed it. This time, the money may have finally won, except the mountain itself is disappearing underneath them. Aspen started as nothing, worse than nothing. A few tents pitched at 8,000 feet in a valley so remote that supplies had to come over Independence Pass, a 12,000-foot saddle that a loaded mule could barely survive. The year was 1879. Prospectors had been pouring out of Leadville, the great silver boomtown on the other side of the Continental Divide, looking for the next strike. A man named Henry Gillespie established a camp called Ute City along the Roaring Fork River, petitioned the government for a post office, and waited for the big one he was sure was coming. The silver was there, loads of it. By 1880, the camp had been renamed Aspen after the quaking trees that covered the slopes in every direction, and within a few years a proper rush was underway. But Aspen had a problem that nearly killed it before it started: isolation. The ore was there, deep and rich, but getting it out of a mountain valley surrounded by 14,000-foot peaks was nearly impossible. Everything depended on whether a railroad would come. Without rails, the silver might as well have stayed in the rock. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad arrived in the late 1880s, and the effect was like striking a match in a room full of gas. The Smuggler Mine, cut into the slope at the north edge of town, began producing ore so fast that miners worked it around the clock. 200 men on shifts, hauling silver out of shafts that went deep into Smuggler Mountain. By 1891, Aspen had overtaken Leadville itself as the top silver-producing district in the entire country, responsible for 1/6 of all silver mined in America and 1/16 of the world supply. The average annual output of the mines was $6 million. Aspen became a pioneer in hydroelectricity, rigging power from its mountain streams, making it one of the first cities west of the Mississippi to have electric street lighting. A mining camp that had existed for barely a decade suddenly had 6 newspapers, 10 churches, 3 banks, 3 streetcar lines, hospitals, schools, and a growing population that would reach somewhere between 10 and 16,000 people. And into this chaos came a man from New York with enormous ambitions. Jerome B. Wheeler was the co-owner of Macy's department store, the biggest retail operation in the country. He visited Aspen on vacation in 1883, saw the mountains, saw the silver, and made a decision that sounds almost reckless. He would make this remote mining camp into a city worthy of the wealth buried underneath it. He sold his interest in Macy's in 1888 and poured more than $6 million into Aspen. Silver mines, a smelter, a tramway system to bring ore down the mountain, a bank, an opera house with velvet seats, and finally, the hotel that still bears his name. The Hotel Jerome opened the night before Thanksgiving, 1889. 3 stories of red brick and sandstone, 90 rooms, 15 baths, full electric lighting. One of the first buildings west of the Mississippi to have it. Running water, steam heat, an elevator. The builders Wheeler originally hired, 2 Kansas innkeepers named Bixby and Phillips, wanted it to rival the Ritz in Paris. Wheeler donated the land at the corner of Mill and Main Streets, a prime parcel known as Jacob's Corner, and loaned Bixby and Phillips $60,000 to get started. Costs quickly more than doubled. A month before opening, the builders vanished, leaving Wheeler holding approximately $150,000 in bills, the equivalent of roughly $4 million today, plus another $25,000 in furnishings. He finished it himself and threw the party anyway. Rooms cost $3 a night. Socialites arrived on Pullman sleeping cars. The lobby had locally crafted floor tiles, stone columns, a fireplace, and a rose and green glass ceiling that caught the morning light. In 7 years, Aspen's mines had produced $112 million in ore. The town felt permanent. It felt inevitable. It was neither, and the evidence was already there for anyone willing to see it. In 1892, miners at the Smuggler pulled out a silver nugget weighing 2,060 pounds, 93% pure silver, the largest ever found in America. A young office boy named Joseph Hicks and a driver named Kit Burns loaded the thing onto a flatbed and carted it through downtown Aspen. People lined the streets to stare. The nugget was destined for the Chicago World's Fair, where it would represent everything Aspen had become. But that same year, the cracks were already spreading. Lawsuits began piling up against Wheeler. Investors in his mines accused him of fraud. He sold the Hotel Jerome to a Denver businessman named Archie Fisk for $125,000, less than he'd spent finishing it, and started liquidating everything he owned. Another lawsuit hit him with an $800,000 judgment he couldn't begin to pay. Then came the day that ended everything. On August 7, 1893, President Grover Cleveland called Congress into emergency session and pushed to repeal the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, the federal law that had required the government to buy millions of ounces of silver every month. The law had been the invisible floor underneath every silver mine in the country. When the repeal passed, the floor vanished. Silver prices cratered overnight. Mines across Colorado slammed shut. In Aspen, the collapse was instant and total. Workers left by the hundreds, businesses closed, families packed wagons and disappeared back over the pass. The Smuggler mine was one of the only operations that kept running at all, and even it limped along at a fraction of its former production until finally closing in 1917. Jerome Wheeler, who had bet his Macy's fortune on the permanent value of silver in a remote Colorado valley, spent his final years in Manitou Springs, broke, quiet, and forgotten. He never came back to Aspen. He died in 1918. The hotel he built outlived him, but just barely. The town that had held 16,000 people fell to under 1,000. By 1930, the population was roughly 700. Locals called what followed the quiet years, and for 5 decades that's exactly what they were. The Victorian buildings that Wheeler and his era had built, the brick commercial blocks, the Opera House, the courthouse, the Hotel Jerome itself, stood largely intact because nobody had the money to tear them down and nobody had a reason to build anything new. Ranchers grazed cattle in the valley. People grew their own food, raised livestock at 8,000 feet, and endured winters so cold that those who couldn't afford heat moved into the Hotel Jerome just to stay warm. The grandest building in town, the place Wheeler intended to rival the Ritz in Paris, became a boarding house run by a former bartender and his son. Rooms that had cost $3 a night went for whatever someone could scrape together. Meanwhile, the ghost towns multiplied. Ashcroft, a mining camp just up Castle Creek, emptied almost entirely. Independence, the settlement at the top of the pass, was abandoned to the wind. Aspen hung on, barely, as a place people endured rather than chose. But the quiet years preserved something extraordinary, and this is the detail that changes the entire story. While other Colorado boomtowns were demolished, burned, or stripped for lumber, Aspen's downtown survived almost intact. Block after block of 1880s commercial architecture, Victorian houses with original woodwork, the opera house, the courthouse, the hotel, all of it frozen in time by the simple fact that nobody could afford to replace any of it. The poverty that nearly killed Aspen also saved it. When someone finally came looking for a beautiful town to reinvent, everything they needed was already standing. That someone arrived in a way nobody could have predicted, from a war. Actually, from two directions at once. The United States Army's 10th Mountain Division was created specifically to fight in the Italian Alps, and its soldiers trained at Camp Hale, a high-altitude base about 60 miles from Aspen at over 9,000 feet. The division attracted ski fanatics and mountaineers from across the country, some of the best winter athletes in America, taught to climb rock faces, survive avalanches, and ski carrying full combat loads. On their 36-hour weekend passes, some of them went to Denver, where a few reportedly horrified the staff of the Brown Palace Hotel by demonstrating rappelling techniques in the 9-story atrium. Others went west into the roaring Fork Valley. Many of them ended up in Aspen. The Hotel Jerome's operator, a man named Lawrence Elisha, offered soldiers a room and a steak for $1 each. The J-Bar served a drink called the Aspen Crud, bourbon poured into a milkshake. Some soldiers' wives moved to Aspen and waited there while their husbands trained at Camp Hale. These weekend visits planted something. The soldiers saw a ghost town surrounded by some of the most spectacular ski terrain on the continent, and they started to imagine. One of them, an Austrian-born champion skier named Friedel Pfeiffer, had grown up in the village of St. Anton and knew exactly what a world-class ski mountain looked like. During a training march that brought his platoon over the mountains and down into Aspen, Pfeiffer hiked up the slope behind town with another soldier, Percy Rideout. The two men stood at the top and stared down, visualizing where they would cut trails, where they would put the lifts, how the runs would fall. Pfeiffer later wrote that even as the townspeople cheered the soldiers marching in, he was overwhelmed by something else entirely, a vision of his entire future. He vowed right there on that mountain to come back after the war and build a ski resort that could rival anything in the Alps. Pfeiffer almost didn't survive to keep the promise. He took a near-fatal chest wound on the first day of the 10th Mountain Division's April 1945 offensive in Italy. Shrapnel tore into his chest. He spent months recovering. But 5 months after the war ended, he was back in Aspen, a town of fewer than 1,000 people, many of them barely scraping by, the Hotel Jerome still running as a boarding house. Another soldier, Fritz Benedict, had loved Aspen so deeply that he bought property before the war was even over, committing to settle there regardless of what came next. Pfeiffer found an unlikely, and in hindsight, perfect partner in Walter Pepke, a wealthy Chicago industrialist who ran the Container Corporation of America, one of the largest packaging companies in the country. Pepke and his wife Elizabeth had visited Aspen in the late 1930s, been stunned by its beauty and its Victorian architecture, and developed a vision of the town as something far more ambitious than a ski hill. Pepke wanted a place that combined physical recreation with intellectual and cultural life, what he called the whole man. He imagined an American Davos, a mountain village where philosophy professors and business executives would ski in the morning and debate ideas in the afternoon. Together, Pepke and Pfeiffer founded the Aspen Skiing Corporation in 1946. That summer, workers began building a chairlift up the south face of Aspen Mountain. On January 11, 1947, Lift 1 opened, the longest chairlift in the world at the time. The governor of Colorado came out to cut the ribbon. A sign behind him read, "Aspen, world's longest ski lift." A rough gravel airstrip called Sardis Field was built the same year, and by 1948, commercial flights could reach the valley with relative ease. For the first time in decades, the outside world could get to Aspen without driving a mountain pass. Pepke's ambitions went far beyond skiing. He wanted Aspen to embody what he called the Aspen idea, a community built around mind, body, and spirit. He founded the Aspen Institute, brought in the legendary Bauhaus designer Herbert Bayer to create a modernist campus integrated into the landscape, and in 1949 hosted the Goethe Bicentennial Convocation, a 2-week gathering of international thinkers including Albert Schweitzer, Thornton Wilder, and José Ortega y Gasset. 2,000 people came to a town that had held 700 a decade earlier. In 1950, Aspen became the first resort outside Europe to host the FIS World Alpine Ski Championships, a statement of international credibility that would have seemed laughable 5 years before. Elizabeth Pepke, Walter's wife, deserves a separate sentence in this story. She had been the one who first appreciated Aspen in winter, who convinced her husband to invest, and who spent decades watching over the town's cultural development to make sure the commercial side didn't devour the intellectual one. She curated programming, guarded aesthetic standards, and fought quietly against the forces that would eventually overwhelm everything she cared about. It worked, for a while. By the 1950s and 60s, Aspen was drawing not just skiers, but writers, artists, physicists, musicians, architects. The Aspen Music Festival opened, eventually becoming one of the premier classical music events in the country. The International Design Conference launched. The Aspen Center for Physics brought some of the sharpest minds in the world to a campus where they could think in mountain air. The town became what Pepke had dreamed, a place where a ski bum and a quantum physicist might ride the same chairlift, where a concert pianist might share a bar stool with a ranch hand. The Hotel Jerome, refurbished and lively again, became the social center of it all. Movie stars drank at the J Bar. Singer John Denver moved to the area, wrote Rocky Mountain High, and romanticized Colorado for millions of listeners. For a brief, specific window, Aspen was something America had almost never produced, a small mountain town that was simultaneously world-class and genuinely communal. Property was affordable enough that artists and teachers could live there. The culture wasn't imported for tourists. It grew from the people who actually stayed. But that window was already closing. Because the thing about creating a beautiful, famous, culturally rich town is that beautiful, famous, culturally rich towns attract money. And money has its own ideas about what a town should be. The first wave came in the 1960s and 70s, and the clash was immediate. By 1967, a prominent local restaurateur and police magistrate named Guido Meyer was waging a one-man campaign to run hippies out of town. He charged them with absurd offenses, harassed them on the streets, and made no secret of his contempt. A local lawyer named Joe Edwards took up their cause and brought the case to court. Meyer, unable to contain himself, erupted on the stand, ranting about how the hippies were filthy, unwashed, dope-smoking agents of chaos. The judge sided with the hippies. Meyer had blatantly denied people their constitutional rights based on appearance and was too proud to deny it. Edwards became a hero. In 1969, he ran for mayor of Aspen. The establishment laughed until election night, when Edwards lost by exactly 6 votes out of 1,200 ballots cast. There were 5 absentee ballots for Edwards that arrived too late to count. 6 votes. That margin electrified a journalist named Hunter S. Thompson, who had moved to nearby Woody Creek in 1967 and was watching Aspen transform with mounting fury. Thompson had come home from the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, disgusted by what he'd seen. Protests violently suppressed, riots, corrupt politicians, brutal cops, and found more of the same in his own valley. He saw the developers coming. He saw the condominiums. He saw the land deals and the first signs that Aspen's identity as a creative, countercultural outpost was being quietly auctioned off to the highest bidder. He decided to run for sheriff of Pitkin County in 1970 on a platform he called Freak Power. His 6-point plan was deliberately outrageous. Rip up every asphalt street in town and replace them with sod. ban all cars from downtown, and deploy a fleet of public bicycles maintained by the sheriff's office. Rename Aspen Fat City to scare away, as he put it, the greedheads, land rapers, and human jackals who were capitalizing on the town's name. Put dishonest drug dealers in stocks on the courthouse lawn. Leave marijuana users alone. The sheriff and his deputies would be unarmed. Thompson set up campaign headquarters in the J Bar at the Hotel Jerome, the same bar where 10th Mountain Division soldiers had drunk Aspen cruds 25 years earlier. He showed up daily, ordered food, sorted mail, wrote campaign materials between drinks, sometimes working until dawn. His campaign manager, Michael Solheim, ran volunteer operations from a corner table. The J Bar transformed from a tourist bar into what felt like a revolutionary base camp. Regular locals stayed away during campaign season, unsure of what they might hear. Thompson also partnered with artist Thomas Benton to create a series of bold, provocative broadsheets called Aspen Wall Posters, half art, half political attack. The very first poster exposed a corrupt local attorney who resigned after it was published. The posters appeared everywhere, plastered on buildings, passed hand to hand. They turned Aspen into a national story. Thompson lost, but the way he lost was almost more alarming than a victory would have been. The county's Republicans and Democrats, who normally couldn't stand each other, formed an emergency coalition specifically to stop him. Even combined, they barely managed it. Thompson took roughly 40% of the vote. The lesson was obvious to anyone paying attention. The forces Thompson was fighting, the developers, the land deals, the slow conversion of a community into a commodity, were already winning. His campaign didn't stop them. It just proved how popular their opposition was. Aspen's 1978 Growth Management Ordinance imposed annual caps on building permits, initially around 250 residential units countywide, one of the earliest attempts in America to limit growth by popular vote. But the fundamental problem wasn't a policy problem. It was a success problem. The more beautiful, famous, and culturally alive Aspen became, the more valuable its land became. And the more valuable the land, the less affordable it was for the people who had made Aspen beautiful, famous, and culturally alive in the first place. It's a loop, and Aspen has been trapped in it ever since. The Crown family of Illinois, a dynasty with major stakes in General Dynamics, J.P. Morgan Chase, the New York Yankees, and the Chicago Bulls, acquired the Aspen Skiing Company. Several Crown family members bought homes in the valley. They poured hundreds of millions into the four mountains: Aspen Mountain, Aspen Highlands, Buttermilk, Snowmass. They built new lifts, improved snowmaking, invested in the kind of infrastructure that makes a ski experience genuinely world-class. The investment was real and substantial. But it also cemented Aspen's status as a destination for a class of wealth that Walter Pepke never imagined, and Hunter Thompson couldn't have stopped. Through the 1980s, the Hotel Jerome received a full renovation that restored its original Victorian elegance. Aspen began appearing in celebrity magazines, on television, in the gossip columns. The skiing was extraordinary. The dining was extraordinary. The shopping was extraordinary. And one by one, the people who could afford extraordinary began arriving, not to be part of the community, but to own a piece of the scenery. By the 2000s, Aspen had become something genuinely unique in America. A town of roughly 7,000 permanent residents, where an estimated 120 to 125 billionaires owned property. Not millionaires, billionaires. More per capita than any city in the country, more than New York City, which had about 101. Their combined net worth exceeded $350 billion. The combined value of their Aspen real estate alone topped $750 million. Red Mountain, the ridge overlooking downtown Aspen to the north, earned a nickname, Billionaire Mountain. Estates there routinely sold for $30 million or more. Properties rarely appeared on public listings, Most transactions happened off-market, negotiated privately between agents with deep local networks. The homes held in LLCs and trusts and family offices. A hedge fund manager paid $52.6 million for a Starwood estate with 56,000 square feet, so large he planned to scale it down. A German software tycoon owned 2 Red Mountain homes worth a combined $19.3 million. The Walmart heiress had a ranch. A casino billionaire kept a mansion worth $25.5 million. A candy fortune heir owned a home assessed at $38.4 million. Tech founders, energy tycoons, oligarchs, royal families, they were all up there, behind gates, behind aspen groves, behind the names of shell companies that revealed nothing about who actually slept inside. The highest residence on Red Mountain, a 22,000 square foot mansion called the Peak House Estate, had 7 bedrooms, an indoor pool, a 12-car garage, and a secret bedroom with a hidden passageway built for the original owner's mistress. It was listed at $44.5 million. Most of the year, nobody was home. And down below, in the town those mansions overlooked, the consequences accumulated like snow on a roof that was never shoveled. The average free market home in Aspen reached $7.6 million by the late 2000s. By 2025, the median single-family sale price hit $13.2 million. In the first quarter of 2026, it jumped to $22.75 million. Price per square foot in the most sought-after neighborhoods passed $6,000. 42 properties sold for more than $20 million in a single year. One home on Ute Avenue closed at $76 million. A monastery outside of town sold for $120 million. A ski instructor cannot compete with that. A nurse cannot. A firefighter, a teacher, a chef, a plumber, none of them can. The gap isn't a crack, it's a canyon. The statewide median home price in Colorado was $584,000 in 2025. Aspen's was $13.2 million, roughly 23 times higher. The price per square foot in prime Aspen neighborhoods passed $4,000, and in the most coveted slopeside locations climbed past $6,000. At $6,000 per square foot, a modest 3-bedroom house costs more than most Americans will earn in a lifetime. The city of Aspen, recognizing the crisis decades ago, built one of the most aggressive affordable housing programs in the country, funded by a real estate transfer tax. The Aspen-Pitkin County Housing Authority created deed-restricted homes with capped selling prices ranging from about $1 to $2 million, still staggering by national standards, but a lifeline in a town where the free market starts at $7 million. Thousands of workers were able to own homes in the valley because of this system. Other Colorado ski towns looked at the program in the 1990s and shook their heads. Too complicated, too heavy-handed. We won't need that. 10 years later, some of those towns couldn't afford to hire a police chief because housing prices had driven every qualified candidate away. But even Aspen's program is hitting a wall. By 2025, somewhere between 20 and 40% of those deed-restricted homes were occupied by retirees. People who bought in decades ago still live there, but no longer work in town. The Housing Authority now estimates that 37% of the ski company's workforce will retire in place, creating an urgent need to house their replacements in a market where replacements can't afford to exist. The workers who do remain often commute from Basalt, Carbondale, or Glenwood Springs, towns strung along the roaring Fork Valley as far as 40 miles away. The traffic jam they create on Highway 82 every morning has become, according to the ski company's own executives, a massive impediment to the very experience they're selling. Here's what that looks like in practice. Over 80% of homes above the $20 million line are not primary residences. They're occupied an average of 2 to 12 weeks a year. The rest of the time, these houses, heated, maintained, landscaped by workers who commute from 40 miles away, sit dark and empty. Locals began calling the quiet neighborhoods Income Village. One real estate observer noted that the first thing you notice in some parts of Aspen isn't the private jets on the tarmac at Sardie Field, or the boutiques, or the snow. It's the silence. Walk through town on a Tuesday in October and you'll feel it. The storefronts are open. Gucci, Prada, Louis Vuitton have all set up shop on the old commercial blocks that silver miners built. But the streets are strangely sparse. The mansions on the West End, behind their carefully maintained Victorian facades, are dark. Former Mayor Mick Ireland, who served 3 terms and watched the transformation from the inside, said the town had become hollowed out, not by poverty, like the mining towns it once competed with, but by wealth so concentrated it functions like a vacuum. The money arrives, buys the house, pays the property tax, and leaves. What stays behind is a town-shaped thing with world-class restaurants and not enough residents to fill them on a weeknight. And now, the thing that made all of this possible, the snow, the mountain, the skiing itself, is under threat in a way that no amount of money can engineer away. Aspen Skiing Company executives gave a series of presentations to local governments in June 2026 that read like a warning shot, maybe the starkest public admission the company had ever made. The question they asked elected officials was blunt. Is Aspen still a ski town? Then they showed the data. Skier visits to Aspen and Snowmass had declined by an average of 11% over the past 3 years. The most recent winter, the 2025 to 2026 season, saw a staggering drop of 21.5%, the worst anyone could remember, driven by historically low snowfall that left dirt patches visible on the slopes even in December. Colorado as a whole lost nearly a quarter of its skier visits that year. The company's sustainability director, Hannah Berman, said publicly what locals had been whispering for years. Aspen's mountains have lost about a month of winter since the 1980s. A full month. Gone. Between 2000 and 2019, American ski areas collectively lost more than $5 billion to shortened seasons, declining visits, and the rising cost of artificial snowmaking. That number is still growing. One study found that the average ski season in the United States shrunk by 34 days between 1982 and 2016. Snow cover dropped by an average of 41% over that same period. At Aspen, the company spent $6 million on snowmaking enhancements in a single summer, the summer of 2026. But as the company's CEO, Jeff Buchheister, pointed out in his presentation, snowmaking has a hard physical limit. The temperature must be below freezing. If it's not, the $6 million machines are just expensive metal sitting on a warm mountainside. And long-term forecasts for the valley all point the same direction. Warmer. The Crown family, through its executives, told elected officials that it might not be able to continue investing in the 4 mountains the way it had in the past. The language was careful, but the implications were stark. A flat industry, a revenue ceiling, rising costs, aging infrastructure, a business under pressure across all 4 mountains. They warned of American skiers increasingly traveling to Europe. They warned of consolidation by competitors like Vail Resorts and its Epic Pass, which bundles dozens of mountains into one affordable season ticket, making it easy for skiers to choose quantity over prestige. Why pay Aspen prices when an Epic Pass gives you access to resorts across the country and Europe? The pricing pressure was real and growing, and Aspen, which has never joined a mega pass, was feeling it from every direction. And meanwhile, at the western base of Aspen Mountain, at the very spot where the whole ski story started, where Friedel Pfeiffer's chairlift first carried a handful of dreamers up the slope in 1947, something is happening right now that says everything about where this story ends. There's an irony in Aspen that runs deeper than any single decision or development deal, and it goes all the way back to the beginning. Every time someone tried to save this place, they changed it into something unrecognizable. Jerome Wheeler tried to make a mining camp grand, and the silver collapsed underneath him. Pepke and Pfeiffer tried to build a mountain haven for the mind and body, and the beauty they created attracted wealth that consumed the culture they intended. Thompson tried to fight the developers with political theater and raw fury, and the developers won anyway. The affordable housing program, one of the most ambitious in the country, is now threatened by the retirements of the very people it was built to protect. And the billionaires? They built their mansions on a mountain that is, slowly and measurably, losing the thing that brought them there. The snow that made Aspen worth billions is receding. The winters are shorter. The ski company is hedging its bets. The workers who run the lifts and cook the food and teach the lessons are aging out of homes they can never be replaced in. Think about the pattern. In the 1880s, the thing underneath Aspen was silver. One law changed, and all of it evaporated. In the 1940s, the thing underneath Aspen was snow, and the idealism of people who believed a ski town could also be a place for the mind. That vision attracted wealth, and the wealth consumed the vision. Now the thing underneath Aspen is the wealth itself, the homes, the prestige, the brand. But that brand still depends on snow, and the snow is leaving. A study cited by the ski company found that between 2000 and 2019, the ski industry lost more than $5 billion to climate-driven changes. The company spent $6 million on snowmaking improvements in a single summer. Their own CEO pointed out the obvious. If the temperature doesn't drop below freezing, the machines are just expensive metal sitting on a mountainside. The Crown family warned local officials they might not be able to keep investing the way they had. They used careful language, revenue ceilings, aging infrastructure, a business under pressure. But the meaning was plain enough. Meanwhile, at the very spot where the whole ski story began, Lift 1A came down this summer. 55 years of service done. In its place is a construction site. A $350 million redevelopment will eventually put an Aman Hotel, one of the most exclusive hospitality brands on the planet, a name synonymous with extreme wealth and extreme privacy, right at the base of Aspen Mountain. Next door, a timeshare project called Chalet Alpina. Commercial space, a parking garage that has to be built before the new lift can even be installed, a new high-speed chairlift that won't open until at least 2029. The original Lift 1 towers, the physical remnants of Friedel Pfeiffer's dream, will be preserved in a small public park inside the development. Future guests walking from the Aman to the gondola will pass them. Most will not know what they are. The Hotel Jerome still stands on the corner of Mill and Main, a 3-story red brick monument to a man who sold his share of Macy's, bet everything on silver, and died broke. The J-Bar still serves drinks. The light still falls through the old rose and green glass ceiling in the lobby. A room there now costs over $1,000 a night, more than Jerome Wheeler spent on some of his miners in a month. More than 10 times what a 10th Mountain Division soldier paid for a room and a steak and a bourbon milkshake in 1943. On Red Mountain above the town, the windows of a 22,000-square-foot mansion stay dark through most of the year. Nobody's home. The heating system runs anyway. Below, on Highway 82, the headlights come on before dawn. Nurses, cooks, teachers, lift operators, driving in from towns an hour away to keep the most expensive ski resort in America running for another day. And at the base of the mountain that started it all, behind a construction fence, a crane stands where Lift 1 used to be.